As a new government takes shape in Italy, investors have questions, and we've got some perspective and a few answers on this episode of the Cocktail Investing Podcast.
Welcome back, listeners, to another special episode of the Cocktail Investing Podcast. This one circling a little differently. Normally on the podcast, we try to distill everyday noise into clear investing signals, but on today's special episode, we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive. You've probably been seeing in the headlines that, hey, there's a new government in Italy and it is raising some concerns. Well, lucky for you, Tematica's chief macro strategist Lenore Hawkins has boots on the ground in Italy, and we're going to get her perspective on that and what all this could mean today. I'm Chris Versace, Tematica's chief investment strategist, and speaking of that aforementioned chief macro strategist Lenore Hawkins, I think she's right here.
I am here.
Sorry. Just trying to give you the proper accolades and set up what we're going to talk about, because unlike a lot of other people that are pontificating over what might happen in Italy, you reside probably half, if not more than half of your time in the country. So you have some valuable insight and perspective on that. So let's dispense with the usual housekeeping items, because this is a special episode. But folks, be sure to check out tematicaresearch.com. All our wares are there. Lenore, you know, I obviously live in the United States of America, and I've been, reading in the headlines a bunch of things about what's going on. And it seems that there's a new populist government that's being formed in Italy, correct? And there's some concerns over the fact that they feel like, I think the word they used is they passed a master plan, if I saw the wording correctly, which focuses in on increasing spending and slashing taxes. Yeah. And the windup, I think, that has people concerned is the Italian economy is not exactly on fire, right? It's probably one of the weaker ones in the Eurozone, even though it's one of the largest.
Yeah. Third largest.
Third or fourth. I thought I saw fourth. But anyway. And the issue is that as we look at the country's debt, it's already 130% debt to GDP. So is this Greece all over again? Sovereign debt crisis coming. Help us understand.
Yeah, it's complicated. Okay, so first we're going to talk about Italy. I have to give a little bit, try to do this really quick, of just context for the country.
Sure.
So that all this makes sense. Now, one of the fascinating things to think about when you think of Italy versus the United States is that while we in the United States, like we look over at Italy and we, the Roman Colosseum and
pasta, gelato.
Yeah, all that too. God, gelato. We think of it as this very old country, but it's actually much younger than the United States. Italy was only made a country in the mid 1800s, right, versus us. Prior to that, it was mostly a bunch, putting aside the Roman Empire, a very long time ago, is a bunch of effectively little city-states. Mm-hmm. And all these little city-states hated each other. So you'll have, whereas in the U.S., you'll have a big difference, like you don't have somebody from San Francisco going, I hate Colorado. The United States really is much more of a United States. In Italy, you have a very big cultural difference. There's even language differences. Now they all speak Italian, which is it's really more the Florentine language. But you even have like local dialects that are very different. Mm-hmm. So you have to have that context. And then on top of that, Italy basically never gets rid of laws. So you have ancient Roman law. They just, they keep their buildings, their aqueducts. Like where I live in Italy, I actually get water through Roman aqueducts. Well, they keep their laws too. So you have these ancient Roman laws that still exist. And then you just keep adding more and more laws, right? Like we do. They're kind of a cautionary tale. So everything in Italy is freaking complicated, because if you try to figure out like, well, can I not do this? How do I go about doing this? You'll have a bunch of layers of laws that all contradict each other, right? So you have to have in context that is considered normal there.
Now, let me just ask this question, because, if people are reading around in the headlines today, there's some news that the Eurozone wants to regulate U.S. technology companies, which, kind of makes me ask the question, based on what you just said, is Italy even more so on the regulatory front or the controlled front? I'm not sure that's the right word, but more so than the rest of the Eurozone, or is it kind of on par with it?
As they say in Italy, dipende. So Brussels. So yeah, great point to throw to really give the big picture of this. So you've got a country where the joke in Italy is the shortest distance between 2 points is an arabesque, right? And that just comes because everything there is so freaking complicated because there's just this long history of rules and regulations, and they basically never get rid of anything. Then you throw on that it's part of the Eurozone. And now that means you've got 30,000 bureaucrats sitting in Brussels,
right,
doing things like making 800 pages of regulation on light bulbs. You have these guys in Brussels making all kinds of rules and regulations around the transportation of rosemary. So it's very, very freaking messy. Now going to the election. Okay. So when you vote in the United States, right, you go to your polling place and you pick a person. You vote for president. Now the presidential equivalent in Italy, they have a president, but the president is more like, he has very limited powers and he's not anything like our president. Their equivalent more of the president is the prime minister. But in Italy, you don't vote for the prime minister. The prime minister is nominated by whoever wins the most votes, whatever party.
So who's ever the most popular?
Exactly. Who's ever the most popular group, the most popular political group, they get to nominate. And then the president is kind of, the intent that you can think of the president is like kind of the wise old sage. He's has a bit of a role like our Supreme Court in that he decides, is this proper with the Constitution or not? And he decides ultimately on, is this prime minister acceptable? So this last election was fascinating. And part of what's going on there is, like you said, Italy's economy has really struggled. Now, the big picture on one of the reasons for it struggling, one, it struggles because it's overburdened by government. I mean, government spending is massive. You cannot get an economy going when you've got a gazillion rules and regulations, when so much money is actually spent by the government. And then on top of that, one of the dirty little secrets is because you have such a massive government, a lot of the private sector provides services, goods to the government. The government then doesn't pay because the government's broke. So yeah, so it's kind of in this death spiral. And like you said, it's got a massive debt load. While Italy's economy is the third largest in the Eurozone. I think when you said fourth, you're thinking of the UK.
Could be, yeah, could be.
Right, so take that out. Behind Germany and France. Its economy is actually 10 times the size of Greece's. So it really does matter. Its public debt, now while it's the third largest economy, just the third in Eurozone, its public debt is the largest in the Eurozone, and it's the fourth largest debt in the world, which basically makes it at the same time too big to fail and too big to save.
Okay.
So it's complicated, right? Now, one of the tough things for the Italian economy is this disparity you see between the Northern Eurozone and Southern Eurozone. Germany benefits from having an artificially low exchange rate. So Germany's exports under the Eurozone, boom, Germany does fantastic. Italy has an artificially high exchange rate. So its exports really suffer, right? Because it should have a lower exchange rate. Now, one of the ways that Italy benefits is Italy is able to borrow at much lower rates. And that's what it's doing, right? Because Italy needs to make massive reforms to fix the economy.
Can any government do that? And B, given what this new government is sounding like they're promising, are they the ones to do it?
Oh God, no. Okay, so can they make the changes? No, because back to the way the government there works. So you go to the polls and you pick a team, right? And be very careful, U.S., about wanting more political parties. Right now, there are all kinds of problems in the U.S. with us really having just a two-party system. Not saying that it's in any way perfect, but be careful what you wish for,
right?
Because there you end up where literally like 1% can control the whole country, because you'll get whoever that tiny little party that can be the swing vote and can join forces can end up dominating. So while you think like technically Italy is a much more of a democracy than the U.S. is. The U.S. is more of a republic. They're more of an actual true democracy. Mm-hmm. When you have a true democracy, you can end up where, you've got 49% on one side, 49% on another, and you just have that tiny little piece in the middle. And where that tiny little piece swings can control everything. So what's happened is, given the economy has struggled so much, for example, youth unemployment rate is 31.7%. In comparison, the youth unemployment rate in the United States is only 8.4%. So it's like 3 times. The overall unemployment rate in Italy is 11%. And that even actually understates it, because so many people have just given up.
So if they had the data where it's the labor force participation ratio, right? That we look at in the U.S., it would be much worse, is what you're saying. Much worse. Yeah.
And on top of that, it's really challenging now. Draghi did a little bit to improve this, but anything to do with businesses there is so much more complicated if you just look at just employment alone, because it's very difficult to hire, it's very difficult to fire. And with that, one of the things that you see in the economy is you see tons of family businesses, tiny little family businesses. Because if it is just a family business and all you're dealing with for the most part are family people to work in the business, you don't have to deal with the employment law the same way you do if you actually hire them, right? Got it. So you have mom and dad and cousins and sisters and brothers all working in this tiny little business, and it can't really grow because once you hire somebody, you really can't fire them. And that becomes very difficult, right? If you hire somebody and it doesn't work out, if you hire somebody and your business takes a downturn, right? And you need to kind of rejigger things. It's very difficult to do that. So you have these tiny little companies, and then you have these massive multinationals that come in from outside of the country, and they're fine because they're already huge and they can withstand. If you've got 5-10% of your workforce, it kind of sucks. They can handle it because they've got, thousands and thousands of employees. They get different deals too when they come in because they're so big and powerful. Just like here.
So let me just ask this quick question, because just for the listener to kind of compare contrast. If, we say in the U.S. that small businesses are the job creation engine, is that the same case in Italy? It doesn't sound like it.
No, not the same case. Because it's the reason that works in the U.S. is because we have just a very strong entrepreneurial, and you can start a business. Like it's possible to start a business. Starting a business in Italy is a lot harder. The amount of rules and regulation, it's just so expensive. And then, like I said, hiring people, you just face hurdle after hurdle after hurdle. Like one of the jokes in Italy is if Steve Jobs was born in Italy, he'd just be riding around on a bike selling apples. That's about as far as he would have gotten.
That's as close to Apple as he would have been, right? Selling apples.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
So now with the current election, you have so much dissatisfaction with the Eurozone, and things kept getting worse and worse with respect to immigration, because Italy, if you look on the map, Africa, Middle East, right there. There's just a little bottle of water, and then bam, you're in Italy. So people fleeing horrific situations in Africa, fearing for their lives, or people just looking for more opportunity, because as bad as Italy and Europe, it's still great.
It's still better. It's still better than someplace else.
It's still better. So Italy gets hit first with the people, fleeing, like Syria. The newspapers are full of people coming in. And it becomes a burden on the economy. And now the Eurozone was supposed to have no borders, right? So I was supposed to be able to go from Italy into France into Germany without even showing a passport. Well, that is actually not what's happening anymore. Under the Schengen agreement, that was the way it was supposed to work. But you're getting illegal immigration into one country, and then those illegal immigrants, as soon as they get in, they can migrate around. Well, so France and Germany they're sitting there going, Italy, we don't want them. And Italy's like, really? I think we're all supposed to be in this together. So there's tensions, right? And France has put up big borders. Everybody's put up borders to try and block this. So Italy ends up with dealing with more of it simply because of its geography. It's the closest one. So there's a lot of frustration about that, and that the rest of the Eurozone is just not stepping up.
Mm-hmm.
So you start to get, similar to what we have in the US, you get these really anti-immigrant sentiments. And so Lega Nord, originally, there's the two parties that won most of the votes originally it was called Lega Nord, now it's just called the League.
Right.
And you have Cinque Stelle, which is the 5-star movement. So Cinque Stelle, 5-star. To try and translate, this isn't exact, but to kind of translate it into more of American kind of views, you've got Cinque Stelle is really, I would put them much more on towards communism.
Oh.
But it's a weird blend. It's on the one hand, there's a bunch of rhetoric that comes out of Cinque Stelle that is very much communist. But at the same time, they want to privatize everything. So I don't have a really easy way to translate it, but they're very much they don't want the government to own it, but they want sort of the group to own it. So
who's the group?
Yeah, exactly. And don't try to make sense of Cinque Stelle. I swear to God, the joke, and this is, I'm not speaking out of turn here, half of the people in Cinque Stelle, the original leader, Beppe Grillo, he was a comedian from Genova, the city where I live. And there are some fine people, I'm sure, but an awful lot of them have turned out to be beyond incompetent. Case in point, look at Rome. The woman who is the mayor of Rome has made that an utter disaster. Rome is literally falling apart. It is heartbreaking to see one of the most important historical cities in the world it's a disaster, because you have somebody in charge of a fairly complex big city who has no experience, and this will come in later why I'm saying this, has zero experience, just could get up on stage and bluster, yell, and scream about how those
Wait a minute. Zero government experience can get on stage and bluster and.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not going there. I'm not going quite there.
You see what I'm saying?
I do, but I'm not quite going there. So she's right now. Everybody's looking at Rome, going, well, that didn't turn out well. So there was expectations that maybe Cinque Stelle wouldn't do so great in the next elections, but they did. Now, Lega Nord, now just the League, because they switched around, they've gotten to power and they don't want to just be called the Northern League. They're more on the fascist side. The leader, Luigi Di Maio, is Matteo Salvini. Matteo Salvini, he's terrifying. On television, to me, he's terrifying. He's made all kinds of threats about using force, violent force, to deal with immigration. And so that is kind of the hallmark of fascism, is using force to get your way. And this has nothing to do with, there's not a legal system or anything like that. It's just going to use actual force. They're very anti-Euro, as is the Cinque Stelle movement, very anti-Euro. Originally, they were super anti-Euro. And the League has been very anti-immigration.
So they sound very isolationist to me.
Extremely. Now, the current election cycle, they really toned down the anti-Eurozone rhetoric. I think they were just trying to get
elected.
But they toning down the anti-Eurozone was it's just fascinating, because they were so adamant, and then they switched. But again, to put in context of Italian culture, because from the outside that looks really weird. How do you have some guy screaming and yelling that the root of all evil is the Eurozone, and then now saying not so much?
I just have to say this. I apologize for cutting you off like I usually do, but it sounds like, much like here, how people will flip-flop on issues at the last minute to garner votes to be elected. That's what it sounds like. That's what it sounds like.
Absolutely. But in Italy, it's a little bit, I would argue that maybe, and this is somebody who lives there, but I mean, I've been there 6 years. I'm still learning. But in Italy, the truth is viewed as not a single universal truth, black and white. It's more that there are versions and perspectives. That's just part of the culture. Whereas American culture is much more the truth. We actually have, in like I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, right? And we perceive that to be a singular fact that is objective,
mutually agreed upon.
Right, exactly. And in Italy, the culture is a little bit different. So it's a little bit, and there, I mean, and you can appreciate that view too, right? Because 5 people in a room, an event happens, all 5 are going to have a different perspective on exactly what it is that happened. So they lean a little bit more towards that view than we do. Okay, so then back to where we have. So Cinque Stelle and Lega Nord, or the League, they win. The two of them, and they're really, ideologically, they don't have a whole lot in common.
Well, that was one of the things I'm sitting here wondering is I hear you saying all this, and yet they have to work together to instill a new government. How does that work?
Because they wanted to win. They wanted to have, because so the last election, no one got a clear majority. And so Italy's been without a government for quite a while.
8 months or so, right?
No, not that long. It's only been a couple months. But it's been like, well, it depends. Yeah, it depends on how you measure. We had the elections a couple months ago, and because no one party got the majority, you had to have, the parties had to see and if we didn't get some parties to get together to actually form a coalition that would have the majority, we would have gone back to elections again. Oh my God, the amount of money the country spends on elections is unreal. Because they're just, it's like, whoa, let's have an election. So these two that have really not a whole lot in common ideologically have joined forces. And they nominated this guy who is like just not known on the national stage at all. He's an attorney and a law professor, Conte. And Conte so the story that came out, he gets nominated. Nobody knows who the hell this guy is.
Right.
He gets nominated. His CV starts getting circulated about, and it has references to him, extensive experience, blah, 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 studied here, studied there. A bunch of these universities in the U.S. So American journalists start doing some research, like, son of a gun, these universities have no record of this guy.
Are you saying that he might have been a little liberal in his descriptions?
Apparently. So, for example, he claims to have studied at the New York University. New York University says they have no record of his attendance. Maybe he attended like a one-day seminar or something. But
he has a special certificate, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Then there was another report. It was written, I love this. There's an Italian journalist who is based in Germany, lives there, found his claim to have studied law at the International Culture Institute in Vienna in 1993 to be highly unlikely, because the school is actually a language school. So now,
that's could it have been what is it? What was one of the funniest things one of the classes I ever heard of? It's like accounting for lawyers. Is it like it's like language for lawyers or something like that?
Yeah, so this guy's, his CV is a little bit suspect, and so everybody was expecting that the president, because the president has to say, okay, this guy's, he's fine. Expected that the president was going to say, oh, hell no, but he didn't. So now he is actually the prime minister. No one really knows, like, he's just not somebody you would have expected, kind of a dark horse. So now what do we got? Well, like you said, so their plan for Italy is basically cut taxes, which, who doesn't like that? But it's cut taxes, spend a bunch more. They're saying they're going to float these like very short-term little mini bonds, which is basically it's kind of like they're trying to do an additional currency to sort of fund all this spending.
But who's going to buy those?
Well, we'll see.
Well, I mean, what I'm hearing you is the math simply does not hold.
The math doesn't hold, but, we live in interesting times. Italy still has unbelievably, their 10-year yield is below ours. Right? I mean, because the Eurozone is just such a different beast from the U.S. So this is going to be interesting. Now, you're going to have all this tension because Italy is looking at, and understandably, You have an economy that is just really struggling, and you look at Germany, and Germany's got crazy low unemployment. Their exports are, fantastic, off the charts level of exports. You're Italy going, what the hell? And you're having to deal on top of that, on top of having a struggling economy, really high youth unemployment, you're having to deal with the expense of all this illegal immigration, and the rest of the Eurozone's like, yeah, no, you're keeping them.
So let me ask you a couple of questions here. So this is a situation that sounds like, from an outsider's view, this is not going to end very well, is what it sounds like to me. So it sounds like there's going to be some fits and starts. Maybe we'll see some policy reform, maybe we won't. But ultimately, if we were to sit back here, 12, 18 months from now, we probably would be like, see, I told you this is what was going to happen, and we would be there. But let's talk about what it means for people who might be listening to this podcast. You're sitting there. You're contending with a Federal Reserve that is going to raise interest rates. You've got trade uncertainty, given what's going on with China, North Korea, the United States, and other things.
Well, and throw in there, too, that part of that trade uncertainty is you've got rising tensions between Europe and the U.S. Because the way that we handled the Iran sanctions has Europe definitely miffed and definitely a little bit stressed out too. Particularly, this affects Italy as well, because Italy does a lot of business with the Middle East. Again, look at the map.
Right.
Sort of obvious, right? Why they would kind of be a bridge there. What the U.S. I'll just make this real short. What happened when the U.S. decided, screw it, we're reimposing the sanctions on Iran and we're out of that deal. Overnight, a ton of companies in Europe who were doing everything right suddenly are now violating basically law by transacting with, as far as the U.S. is concerned, right? They're kind of banned from the U.S. because they're trading with Iran. So when the U.S. popped up these sanctions don't affect just Iran. They affect everybody who deals with Iran.
Right. Well,
and it was fine. It was, Monday, I'm making this up, but like Monday, it was fine to be dealing with Iran. Tuesday, no can do. And Tuesday, you've got to either cut off your ties, you got to quit that business with Iran. And you'd invested, you had all these employees, right? And overnight, it's like, what the hell?
Well,
and it was, being dry, it wasn't actually overnight, but within a very short period of time, it was, the United States told you can no longer conduct business the way you were supposed to be able to conduct. And it was kind of this unilateral decision that the U.S. made. Now, whether that was a right decision or not with respect to Iran, that is a completely separate issue. I'm just talking about the consequences.
Right, you're talking about ripples and ramifications.
Yeah, there were consequences to this that had nothing to do with Iran itself, but we have caused material harm to companies in Europe that previously everything had been fine, and a good chunk of these are in Italy as well. So
yet another headwind to the Italian economy.
Exactly. It's like, oh, great, thanks.
Right. Okay. So, what I think from the U.S. perspective, and some of the things that I've been reading, the concern is that we could potentially see another sovereign debt crisis emerge. I don't want to pin you down and say yes, no, because I know that's not the way you think. I know you. You think
it's more probable. It's much more probable today than it was.
I was just going to say that I know you like to deal in the world of probabilities. So you're seeing all this unfold, and you're saying that there's probably a greater risk of something happening like that could kind of upend confidence in the Eurozone all over again. Confidence in the euro. Is that fair?
Yeah, and before you even get to the debt crisis, the challenge is that you're going to have, who's Merkel going to talk to? And Germany and France, because they're the big players. Those three: Germany, France, and Italy. Who are they going to work with in Italy? To keep things together, and we're already seeing this whole Brexit thing is getting really complicated. So I think what you can say is geopolitical uncertainty continues to increase. And there's no way to predict how this is going to pan out because, I mean, you just think about this real simply. Those people, like the heads of these different countries, they have no clue how this is going to pan out, right? They have no idea when they all get into a room and they try to hash this stuff out and months go by, they have no idea how this is all going to work. So we can't know. All we do know is that there's more uncertainty in the world and it's probably not going to end smoothly.
I'm sorry. I'm picturing some of these leaders in the room going, hey, what do you think? I don't really know. How about you?
Yeah.
Which is what you're saying.
I could see some of these guys like with what just happened in Italy. I gotta think Angela Merkel. I mean, somebody needs to send her like a very large bottle of scotch.
Johnny Walker Blue, I hear. That's the way to go. But having said that, though, again, just getting back to the U.S. investor. So I sit there and I see this geopolitical risk that could start in Italy, could spread, reigniting investor concern.
Yeah.
Right. Odds are, if that does happen, and it sounds like it will, this is probably going to help, drive U.S. stocks higher, drive demand for dollars higher, drive demand for Treasuries higher, as people flee looking for safer ports, safer harbors.
And add that the dollar is strengthening and the euro is weakening to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're in agreement, is what you're saying. Yeah. Okay. What as someone who's on the ground there, let me back up. As someone on the ground there, what would you have to see for you to go, oh man, yeah, the probability in this has gone from, 70% to like 90% of this unfolding? Is there anything like that? Any news items or other things that would get you really kind of worried that the new government might do?
Well, just what we see, what goes on with this, they're and I'm doing air quotes here, the plan, right? With the cutting taxes and the increasing spending, and to see how far they get with that. Because the challenge with Italy, because you asked earlier, is it fixable? Mm-hmm. And I really don't think the problems in Italy, I don't think they're fixable without essentially like just starting all over. I mean, like wiping out the Constitution, making huge reforms to that. And the reason behind that is, so they've got like roughly like little less than 1/5 of the population of the U.S. And they have many multiples over number of people in the House, their version of the House and Senate. Mm-hmm. And they have this coalition system. So you got more people who all want to, have their say, and you've got a much more complicated system for getting things done. Now look at the U.S. and look at how much success we've had.
No, that's why I'm asking.
We are not in nearly as bad a shape, although we are doing our darndest to get there, right? With growing our debt, and I'm just talking about the debt. What we're doing right now is we're
105% GDP. Yeah.
And we have big plans to get that much higher. So we're trying to get there, but they're in a much worse situation when it comes to their debt to GDP ratio. They're in a much more complicated situation as far as all the barriers to getting the economy to really be moving. There's more of them, right? So they got more stuff to remove than we do. And they have a much more complicated way of getting anything done than we have in the U.S. We can't have it. We can't get it done. So I just don't see how Italy's done. I've been there 6 years, and I haven't seen under Draghi. No, sorry, not under Draghi. Under
Renzi.
Thank you. Why do I keep saying Draghi? Under Renzi, you did see some progress on things.
Yes, but he did not.
And then he gave up.
Well, right, exactly. Okay, so
I think it's unlikely. It's big picture, I think it's a matter of time before the Eurozone fails. It's a matter of time before Italy once again defaults. But that's a very long time horizon. I wouldn't say that that's in the imminent future.
So going back to the conversation we had on another episode about trade negotiations between the U.S. and China, you're talking here again, a very long road.
A very long road.
in which we're likely to see fits and starts, uncertainty, volatility. But it sounds like, again, not to put words in your mouth, that ultimately, if this comes to pass, it's another reason that the U.S. stock market could not explode, but be propped up, probably more than it should.
Yeah, you'll have, although, yes, but I wouldn't put let me just kind of discount that a little bit.
Sure.
In that,
these are not absolutes we're talking about.
Yeah, and that Italian people don't invest in the stock market in anywhere near the levels that Americans do.
Mm-hmm.
And one last little thing to throw in the complexity in all this is, we've been talking about sovereign debt. What we haven't talked about is the amount of debt sitting on the banks, and it's getting a little bit better. But that is also a very big problem, in that Italy does not have a well-developed fixed income market. So you don't have anywhere near the level of companies trading on public exchanges, right? That we do here. You don't have anywhere near that, and you don't have that fixed income market, meaning you don't have as a standard, companies in the U.S., they issue bonds all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have that in Italy. You have, or these companies, and again, you have to think of the difference as well with the structure of the economy, how many companies are big, publicly traded, all that versus small. Companies go to private banks. They go to Banca Carige, they go to Monte Paschi. they go to these banks that you've all heard in the headlines, and they borrow from them. Well, these banks have had these non-performing, or my other favorite is likely, right?
Likely to underperform.
Yeah, exactly. You have these borrowings these loans sitting on the bank's balance sheets, and understandably, with the financial crisis, there was this extend and pretend, which really did make sense, right? Because if the bank, and that was kind of a thing between the government and the banks, is like, chill, could you just let them hang in there, right? Because if everybody races to foreclose, right, and you end up with pennies on the dollar, the company's out of business and the bank gets pennies on the dollar, right? So and people are out of work and the economy gets slammed. Or you chill and you let the economy try to heal, and eventually maybe things get back on the right track. And instead of pennies on the dollar, maybe you get like 60 cents on the dollar.
Right.
Well, that's definitely better for everyone, right? Well, you can't have that go forever. And the European Central Bank has been really pushing on these private banks in Italy to deal with all that stuff, to deal with those loans. And that's happening right now. If things get really wobbly, it's not, the reason I say that, if things get real wobbly, it's not like the banks are in great shape there.
Right.
So that's one more concern. And again, third largest economy in Europe and the fourth largest debtor in the world.
So to go back to two words we used earlier, ripple effects, ramifications.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Italy's no Greece. Where I remember how much nerves Greece called, and Greece was.
But that's my point, though, and I think walking away from this entire conversation is that it's going to be a challenge to fix, and the ramifications will be far bigger than Greece. And this could cause some serious problems to the Eurozone. A lot of, to use the Italian word, Lenore, agita to investors. So I think it bears talking about. I'm glad we talked about it on this episode of the podcast. And I think, I suspect that we'll be checking in from time to time on this in the coming weeks and months. So let's leave it there. But it doesn't sound like you'd be a buyer of iShares MSCI Italy Index, that ETF, anytime soon. All right. We'll leave it there. Thanks, Lenore.
Thanks.